Sunday school continues. Now we are in Genesis chapter 41. And in Genesis chapter 41, we're going to talk about Pharaoh's dreams. He couldn't get an interpreter to interpret. And that was when the butler remembered Joseph in prison. So we're going to dive into chapter 41. Verse 1 says, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile. So just imagine, since that time Joseph interpreted that dream for the butler and the baker, and they reinstate the butler. He forgot about Joseph in prison. So it was 2 full years Joseph was still in prison. And when Pharaoh got this dream. Let's go. So when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they gazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the river bank. So Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the river Nile, and out of the river came 7 fat cows, and they were feeding in the grass or the weed by the river. And then there came again 7 thin cows from the same river, and they stood beside the fat ones. And all of a sudden, the thin ones were swallowing the fat ones. They swallowed the fat ones. The thin, ugly fat cows swallowed the fat ones. So let's go further down in the chapter. Sorry for wasting your time, because I'm using the New International Version. So in verse 4, the cows that were ugly and thin ate up the 7 sleek fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Just after that incident, looking at these thin cows swallowing the fat ones, then he woke up. And when he woke up, he fell asleep again. And when he fell asleep, he dreamt another second dream. And this one in verse 5, he fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. So for those of you who have seen grains grow in the farm, one long plant will come up like this, and there will be one stalk like a branch, and there are 7 grains growing on that one stalk. That was what Pharaoh saw in his dream, according to his explanation. And the verse 6 now, after them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. So Pharaoh saw the fat grains growing on one stalk. They were all fat and healthy. And then another thin heads of grain growing on another stalk, and they were all thin and dry, scorched by the east wind. In verse 7, the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. I'm reading from the New International Version because the explanation, in simple English. Other than King James, there are some phrases that we are not familiar with. So this is the reason I'm using the New International Version. So Pharaoh had 2 dreams separately in the same night, one night. The first one, he saw the 7 thin cows swallow the fat ones, and he woke up and he fell asleep again and saw 7 grains growing on one stalk, and they were all fat. And another one came up, they were all thin and scorched by the east wind. and the dry ones, the dry grain again, was swallowing the fat ones. So when Pharaoh had these two dreams, he woke up. In the morning, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them to him. So he had these dreams, and he knew as a leader, it has a meaning. So he wanted somebody to interpret these dreams. He had magicians, wise men, they sent for them all. No one could interpret these dreams. And that was the time this butler or cupbearer of Pharaoh remembered Joseph. How could you do a thing like that? Somebody that has interpreted your dream you are worried about, and you have seen results. Even what happened to your colleague, you have seen results. How could you forget that man in prison for 2 good years? So when Pharaoh has gone through this dream with nobody to interpret, that was when this cupbearer remembered Joseph. And he told King Pharaoh in verse 11, in verse 10, he said, Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. He told him our dreams. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So that was how he went out and explained how they two had dreams in the prison together with the Hebrew boy Joseph, and he interpreted his dreams to them, and things happened exactly as Joseph interpreted the dream. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before the Pharaoh. So just imagine, they abandoned him. This man, this Potiphar that he was serving, abandoned him. He found favor in the sight of the wardens. He was doing his work diligently, came across the cupbearer and the baker. He interpreted their dreams. Things turned out to be the same. They all abandoned him, even when he appealed to this cupbearer. When things get well with you, don't forget me. Be kind to me. Talk about me to Pharaoh. He never did. Until when Pharaoh had that dream, nobody could interpret it. This was the grace of God. May that be our portion, that divine grace that we make. Nobody will be fit to do what is necessary for your divine helper. And that will be the time they think about you. May that never be our portion. That when you do things, you stand out, you will be remembered in the name of Jesus. Because when God says yes, no man can say no. So that was when Joseph was brought in front of King Pharaoh. And they had to go clean him up, shave him, groom him very well, before he can come stand in front of the king. And when Joseph came, the king explained his dream to him. The first part about the fat cow and the dry cow, the thin cow swallowing the fat ones, and the same grains, the fat and the thin one was swallowing the fat grain. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing, and he explained. So let's come to verse 21. He said in verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So after Pharaoh has explained all this ordeal, in verse 25, that was when Joseph finally told him, these two dreams meant the same, but they happened repeatedly to you to show how important they are. The 7 fat cow and the 7 thin cow, the 7 fat cow and the 7 fat grains are 7 years of plenty food, abundance of food that you will get from your nation. And the 7 dry cows and the 7 thin grains are 7 more years. There will be famine in the land. That's how Joseph interpreted his dream, as simple as it was. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain, scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. In verse 28, it is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. In verse 31, the abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows will be so severe. That's how Joseph interpreted his dreams. So in verse 33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. So you see, now Joseph interpreted the dream, and he is suggesting to Pharaoh what plans he has to put in place in order to save his land from that famine that will come after the 7 years of abundance. So he said Pharaoh has to get commissioners, people of trust, to be in that position in the 5th year of abundance. They should gather food from the 5th year of abundance. Just imagine. He said from the 5th year of abundance, they have to gather food. And there should be commissioners, people in authority. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? So after Joseph has made these suggestions to Pharaoh and his men, then Pharaoh turned to his men and said, is there anybody we can choose other than this man? Because this man has the Spirit of God in him. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Correct. This is what I have been looking out for. Now, Joseph has been appointed to be in charge. And Pharaoh said in verse 40, you shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So, Joseph now is second in command. The Hebrew slave boy, from slavery to Potiphar's house to prison to prime minister. 3 P's has appeared finally in his life. What his brothers were trying to stop has perfectly come into position. God has done it for him, and he's going to do it for them too that did that work. They never knew they were doing the right thing for them all. They thought they hated Joseph, and they were trying to do away with his dream. So you see, simple as that, as Joseph interpreted the dreams and made suggestions how to carry out decisions and plans, how to put things in place to save the famine years. For because the first 7 years is going to be year of abundance, they had to gather food and put people in charge, with the king being the head and control over those food. For the years that the famine will come and ravage that land like there was no food. And God and Pharaoh just said, there's nobody here that is wiser than you. You are definitely fit for that position. All my people are going to be answerable to you. It is but just for the respect of the throne, I will be in charge, and you will be next in position. Wow. That sounds so sweet. Even though it wasn't easy, he struggled. He was falsely accused. He was abandoned, rejected. But God was telling him, keep the faith. Just keep the faith. Stand firm. Look unto me, and I will accomplish all your needs. And this is what has been done to Joseph. In verse 46, so Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentiful. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. To that time, Joseph had gotten married to daughter of a priest and had had 2 sons born to him. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." Wow. Just imagine. He named his son Manasseh, that God has made him forget all his troubles and all his father's household. Just imagine. Why should he forget his father's household? Because of what he went through in the hands of his own brothers. The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Ephraim. That was the name of the second son of Joseph. And the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. And the 7 years of famine began just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. God is good. God sent him there to remedy their situation. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." Have you seen that? When the famine started, Pharaoh only passed instructions, refer everybody to Joseph, and they should take instructions from him. In verse 56, when the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. What a gracious thing that happened to a poor slave boy in a foreign land. God was good. His mercies endured forever. And that is the end of chapter 41. We see what will happen on and on to Joseph and his brothers, his father's household in the next video and in the next chapters. Thank you.